Hello, and welcome to Book Circle Presents Kiss the Frog. Gus and Doug have made a deal with Dr. Greathouse, who is going to try to get them back to human. Gus's dad drove them to Greathouse's address down in South Shore. It had been 5 years since either of them had driven, and when they last had, their bodies had fit behind steering wheels better. Certainly night was not a good time to reacquaint themselves with driving. "Pronounce it again?" Mr. Weisskopf asked. "Meshkekwe," Gus ventured, then to Doug, "You say it." "Mishkekekwe," said Doug. "And that's Potawatomi for medicine woman?" Mr. Weisskopf asked again. "That's what she said," Doug confirmed again. "When she's not around, I'm going to say shaman, a magic worker whose basic trick is astral projection." "And how does that help you two?" "Well, she mostly does her projection into the spirit world, she says," Gus answered. "And she says she's going to take us there, too, take our souls anyway. And astral forms can change shape easier than physical ones, so she figures she can change us there." Mr. Weisskopf thought for a block or so. "Your astral forms aren't already human?" he asked. "She seemed to think not," said Doug. "She seems to think our astral bodies look like our physical ones." "Damn it, your souls are the same!" Mr. Weisskopf roared, protested, insisted. Then, after a few seconds' startled silence, "Sorry." "No, thank you, sir," said Doug, just as Gus said, "That's okay, Dad, thanks." "I guess," Doug went on, "souls are further in than astral bodies. And she says she figures if we're shapeshifters, then our physical bodies will follow our astral ones once they're changed back." "Does a soul, just a bare soul, have any shape?" Gus wondered. "What shape is longing?" Doug asked. "Or grief?" Mr. Weisskopf nodded silently and drove on. They pulled up in front of a small brick house on a residential street backed up to a patch of woods. Downtown gleamed through the night to the north. Lung Mao ears could pick out a gentle roll of waves behind the light traffic noise. Mr. Weisskopf, pushed forward by nervous energy, reached the door first and knocked. It opened immediately, held by a man very like Mr. Weisskopf himself, middle-aged and casually dressed, though dark where Weisskopf was fair and slender where he was blocky. Behind him stood Dr. Greathouse, looking nonplussed. So did the man. "You are?" he asked. Gus quickly shifted from looming behind his father to eclipsing him. "I'm Gus Weisskopf. This is my friend Doug Chiang." Doug moved into view. "Dr. Greathouse is expecting us?" He peered over the man's head at her, met eyes, and smiled hopefully. "And this is my dad." Gus moved aside. He drove us here. You see, Last time we drove," Doug filled in, "it was 5 years ago, and we were different shapes." "Oh, I hadn't thought of that," said Dr. Greathouse, stepping forward. She wore a long, loose robe of deerskin leather and went barefoot. "Come on in." "We hadn't thought of it either," Doug admitted as they entered, "until we started planning this trip. We've been getting by on walking and the L." The man, Mr. Greathouse, looked up at Doug and Gus. "You're glamored?" he asked. They glanced at Dr. Greathouse, who nodded minutely. Gus muttered, "Yes, sir," and the two of them took off their scarves. While the man goggled, Mr. Weisskopf said to Dr. Greathouse, "There's another reason I drove them." She looked in his face and immediately said, "You're worried." Mr. Weisskopf stared at her wide-eyed and shrugged. "Look what's happened to them already. And now you're going to—" He trailed off and stared at the floor. "I'm going to try to help them," Dr. Greathouse said a bit sharply. What do you think you could do to save them if something went wrong, or save them from me?" He went on staring at the floor and shook his head. Gus turned away from Greathouse's husband or whatever and said, "Dad, she's just going to try and teach us something we need to learn, so we can leave off being this." He waved his arms. Doug took the other target. "Dr. Greathouse, the patient's family very often hangs around outside the operating room. It's just natural concern." "Is it dangerous?" Mr. Weisskopf asked, nearly in a whisper. "It sounds dangerous." Dr. Greathouse sighed impatiently. "What will happen is that they and I will go sit in my workroom. I will talk to them about their situation. Then, if you were there, you would just see the three of us appear to doze off. They will wake up having learned something, I hope. That's what you'd see if you were there. I do not want you there. This is a private ceremony, operation, thing I'm doing. Other people would distract me." Mr. Weisskopf met her eyes and gave a half smile. "It was even odds you were going to have a caravan of cars outside your house. Me, Doug's dad and granddad, their moms, brothers and sisters, a brother-in-law. Oh, good God!" The man laughed. "How awkward," he said to her. "Your specimens have families." She glared at him and snapped something in a foreign language, unless it was Potawatomi, in which case it was the very inverse of foreign. He gazed back steadily, smiling, and replied in the same language. Doug looked from one to the other. "What's the issue?" he asked. The man, still smiling, replied, "Creative differences." Gus watched the apparent standoff between the man and Dr. Greathouse for a few seconds, then said, "Look, we got a deal going on here. She gets to examine and interview a couple of real fays, elves, Powagons, Norambegans, whatever. In return, she tries to teach us shape-shifting. Can we get on with it?" Dr. Greathouse turned away, saying, "Follow me," and led the two of them off. She took them to a small, plain room paneled in raw wood. There was no furniture except 3 thick, coarse pads of homespun. There were no lights except candles in corners standing in shallow bowls of white sand. The outer wall had a large picture window, but it was curtained now. She had them sit. "Now," she said, "on the one hand, you've told me you freak out at any touch of coercive magic, leftovers from your captivity. On the other hand, you've told me there's no harm if magic pushes your mind in a willing direction, as with your friends who made willing pledges to other magic workers. So tell me true, are you willing for me to do this to you? Take your souls with me where I go and shape you, put you back as you were?" "Yes." "Oh, yeah." "Good. But this is one of those things where enthusiasm gets in its own way. Relax. We're going to try for a light trance. It may take some time. Close your eyes." She began a rhythmic, wordless crooning. Back in the living room, Mr. Weisskopf shifted uneasily, then said to the other man, I'm Marcus Weisskopf, his dad." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder the way Gus had gone. "Micah Greathouse, her brother. Let's sit." They sat. Mr. Weisskopf cleared his throat and said, "I noticed when I asked if this was dangerous, she didn't say yes or no." Micah Greathouse laughed. "Very astute." He sighed, but went on smiling, though more sympathetically. "Helen herself is always in a little danger when she does one of her spirit walks. Your son and his friend, we just don't know what's ahead of them. I don't know anyway, and I don't believe she does." "Are you a a shaman, a medicine man? Sorry if that's... Meshkekwe is a mouthful, isn't it? Shaman is fine, and no, I'm not. I'm not even a Kurdian, though of course I'm so sundered it's not funny. You and your sister have some disagreement about this?" Greathouse's steady smile turned grim. We do. She asked me here, a little reluctantly, because we often disagree, to be a sort of official witness to her goings-on. I certainly came to do that, but I stayed to lower her confidence. He noticed the alarm in Weisskopf's eyes. You see, she's too confident, cocky, has it all scoped out what she's going to do, told me in detail, called me in to witness her triumph. It's to be a triumph, you see, because no one's ever done anything like this before that we know of, been there to teach two newly fledged spirit people how to do their magic. And because no one has done this before, I've spent the last hour or more pointing out to her how much she doesn't know about the situation. She thinks she needs confidence. I think she has far too much and needs caution. Now, here's a thought of mine that might give you a little encouragement. She should be cautious just because your son and his friend are spirit people, polygons, fays, or elves. There are forces of destiny working in the world, Marcus. One of them is the sundering, as you've recently learned. Another attends fays. The word comes from the French fée, from the Latin fata, fate. They are the people of fate. When such folk touch your life, they change its direction, every time. So your son found out for himself, so you and your family have found out already, and so my sister will find. As I said, when she does her shaman work, she's always in a little danger. As for your boys, usually things like them are the danger. Micah Greathouse smiled encouragingly as Marcus Weisskopf kept to himself. Micah Greathouse smiled encouragingly at Marcus Weisskopf and kept to himself the reflection that in fairy tales it is by no means certain that the fairies come out ahead. Doug reflected that it was probably not the done thing ceremonially to check the time on your phone, but geez, how long had it been? He heard Gus give a soft, deep sigh and whisper, barely audible even to his ears, "Holy crow." The night they were snatched and changed, they had already been well-trained soldiers. They had since learned many skills like wilderness survival, sword fighting, and elven languages, but they had never learned how to fall into a trance. When all you could think about was that maybe soon, you could be human again and put some nightmare behind you, stop being a nightmare, it was very hard to make your mind a smooth, dark blank. Finally, the crooning developed words. They couldn't make them out, Potawatomi, presumably, but it was a change. Then they could make them out. Interestingly, they could understand them, though she was still speaking Potawatomi. Follow me, follow me, follow me, follow me. Okay, where? She opened her eyes, and the room went dark. A breeze hit, and there was gentle noise, wind in leaf and on wave. They were outdoors in woods. They stood up, switching their tails uneasily. Doug looked up between treetops. Those are Chicago's stars, he confirmed, and felt Gus relax a little beside him. In some sense, they were still home. Hardly more than an arm's reach away, seated on the pine needles, was Dr. Greathouse, gazing at them. Her deerskin robe had been richly embroidered when they first saw it, and now here the embroidery gleamed like glass or silver. So did her eyes. Your spirits are with mine now, she told them, in the spirit world. Their army reflexes kicked in, and without realizing it, they stood to attention. Greathouse smiled, drifting upward as if she had no weight, as indeed she had not. Very gratifying, but I'm not about to issue orders. I'm about to... They fell over. It was dark. They were cold. Surprise you. They thrashed around, struggling to rise. Something was different as they began to get up. They both felt weaker and lighter. "Why is it so dark?" Doug asked. "What do you do?" he demanded of Greathouse. "Here," said Gus. "Let me try the light on my phone." He fumbled for a few seconds, then got the beam shining. After a few more seconds, Doug had his own light on, playing over Gus. Each saw the other's astonished face. Astonished and human. Doug wiped his free hand around his mouth. No muzzle, no whiskers. He ran his tongue around inside. No fangs. Gus played the phone's light over his body. The clothes hung loose, far too large. There were no scales or spurs on the backs of his hands. And, "No tail!" he laughed. "I got no tail! You got no tail!" Doug laughed back. "It's dark because we don't have cat eyes, and we're little!" The last word was knocked out of him as Gus leapt on him with a bear hug. Hugging, they hopped around in joyous circles. "I'd hardly call you little," Greathouse said, chuckling. "You look about 6 feet tall to me, both of you, but you're not 7. Oh!" Suddenly, she was getting hugged by Gus, quickly followed by a kiss on the cheek from Doug. "You okay?" Gus asked her. "You're cold." "Spirit form," she answered, then cocked a doubtful eye at Gus, whose hug had been quite warm, as had Doug's kiss. "Let's see if I can do something about the lighting. I can see fine, but this is my trip." She looked up at the sky, where the stars began gleaming with unnatural brilliance. She turned her gaze back to her patients. Your clothes usually adjust." They weren't listening. "We gotta show your dad," Doug exulted. Right, Gus agreed. "Hold on," Greathouse commanded. "He couldn't see you yet. Your bodies are still sitting in my house, with mine, still, leonine." "But they'll change to match us, right?" Gus said. "That's the whole idea, right?" said Doug. Yes, of course. Now, let's try it again." "Wait," yelped Doug. "You mean go back to—" There was another burst of change. They did not fall over this time, but then they had their tails to help balance. "No!" roared Gus, sounding more genuinely lion-like than he ever had before. "Why?" demanded Doug, baring the fangs that were back. Greathouse took a step back, but then brought herself to a halt. It was part of a shaman's calling to confront and even provoke supernatural monsters. "You have to learn to make the change yourselves. I'm not sure about your case, but sometimes transformations wear off. You want to be able to change for yourself then, don't you?" "Oh, God!" Gus exclaimed. Doug was startled. Gus never swore as an act of personal devotion. Even this was... Oh. Doug realized this was actual prayer. "God," Gus continued, "let me have this, let me do this, let me be what you made me." "Amen," Doug added, then ditto. To Greathouse he commanded, "Let's have it then." Another shock. Loose clothes, darker dark, no fangs, no tails. This time they did not fall down. "Okay, yeah," said Doug. "Just give us a minute to—" She did not. Their mouths crowded with teeth and their pupils flared wide. They could feel themselves towering. Then they were little again. Then they— "Ha!" exclaimed Doug. He held his forearm before him as if blocking a blow. It swelled but shrank again and stayed human. "Touché," said Gus quietly. He stood with feet spread and arms out as if ready to spring, but he was human. Greathouse folded her arms and met their eyes. "Good. Very quick study, I suppose. I've never done this before, as I said. Now, let's see you make the change yourselves." Gus adjusted his stance, though for what reason he could not say. Then he said to her, "If we go cat and can't get back, you gotta change us. Promise. Don't leave us like that." Doug just stared at her straight and hard. "Of course," she answered promptly. "Shamans may provoke supernatural monsters, but they should not do so unnecessarily." Gus reflected how his centaur friends had said they could no longer remember what it was like to have toes and just 2 legs. But he could remember the tail, the movable ears, all that. It was just a few seconds ago, after all. It felt like this went like this. As Gus started to swell into his clothes, Doug remembered the magical blow he had blocked, remembered that change starting. Think on it continuing. Very good, said Greathouse, surveying the 2 monsters with satisfaction. Now back. She had them do it 10 times in all. After a few, she had them vary the speed. Next, she said, try being a 7-foot man, or a 6-foot lion thing. Lung Mao, Gus told her. Can we be done for the night? I don't feel out of breath or anything like that, but I'm using up something. Manitou, she told them, also called Orenda, Mana, Prana, Chi, and so on. Spell points, said Doug. She snorted. Come on, you're right, it's time to get you home. She led the way through the wood. I just dropped us here, but let's walk back. I want to go slow for the next part. And there was the back of a suburban house bearing a picture window with the curtain drawn. Are we back in the physical? Gus asked. Or is this the dreaming, or the astral? Europeans use those distinctions, she answered. I don't. We're standing on the edge between the spirit world and the physical. We're in spirit form. She walked up to the window. You realize you're on the other side of this curtain? Your bodies and mine are sitting there? They nodded. You won't freak out seeing yourselves from outside? Because I've had patients who did. They shook their heads. How do we get back in? Doug asked. Into our bodies, I mean. Or do you take care of that? Hey, said Gus in happy surprise. I wondered if you'd show up again. He was addressing the raccoon. It met his eyes briefly, then Doug's, then looked steadily at Greathouse. Go ahead, she told it. It shuffled over to a side pane containing a cat flap. As it squeezed through, she explained, we're going slow, remember. You could just walk through the glass, but I want to show you first. The raccoon now oozed through, began pulling on the curtain. Since you are now, by nature, shapeshifters, or so you've been assured, I think your material bodies will automatically shape to the spirit forms. If that doesn't work, I'll try adding some energy to the process, pushing. If that, you sound unsure, Gus noted, watching the curtain inch sideways. Listen, Doctor, Doug told her, even if this isn't a complete success, it's already a solid partial success. Yeah, we can build on it, even if we need to, The raccoon had now pulled the curtain more than halfway aside. They could now see Dr. Greathouse's form sitting slumped on her cloth pad. The other 2 pads lay before her, empty. Okay, Gus said in the deliberate let's not panic tone. Where are our bodies? I know you haven't annihilated us, Doug said in a voice tight as a cello string, because I'm here being confounded. Confusio ergo sum or something like that. He and Gus both looked at Greathouse. You haven't got a clue, have you? Greathouse went on gaping. On the other side of the window, her body curled up tight and shuddered. Can you at least tell us that our bodies exist somewhere? Gus demanded. Why wouldn't our clothes still be there? Doug asked. Shouldn't we leave neat little piles of clothes behind, like getting raptured? They gotta be somewhere, Gus insisted, following his own line of thought. We were over 300 pounds each. Wouldn't the physics police object if we just went poof? Greathouse's body was now rocking back and forth, curled into an impossibly small-looking ball. The face of her spirit form was still registering horror. "Don't you go anywhere," Gus told her. "Don't curl up into nothing or just snap back together and run out of the room screaming. Nothing like that." He reached out and seized her upper arm, working hard to be merely firm, not violent. He noted his hand was now scaly and spurred. He exhaled loudly through his nose and shrank back to human. Gus stared into her face. "You said you just dropped us into the woods in the spirit world. Well, just drop us back. Never mind about the slow and easy approach. We're past that. Click your heels or whatever you need to do and do the drop." Greathouse's eyes shifted from blank to seeing. She met his gaze and nodded. She stepped back so she could see both of them at the same time. She dropped. Greathouse uncurled and gasped. She was so desperate to see what was before her, the effort defeated itself for a moment. Then she realized she saw 2 empty cloth pads. Her rising dismay was distracted by a pounding noise. She looked to the picture window where the raccoon sat on the sill, looking from her to the source of the noise. Doug was rapping on the glass. "Hey," called Gus, "which way to the door? We don't fit through the cat flap." Marcus Weisskopf was giving Micah Greathouse a detailed account of his boys' lives, they were both his, ever since their return to Chicago, inevitably conveying how their families were both upset and overjoyed to a pitch that was hard to contain in one set of hearts. When there was a pounding of feet in the hall, at the same moment the front door burst open. Helen Greathouse seized Gus by the shoulders to make sure of his solidity, her eyes watering, her mouth open to both cry and laugh. Gus breezed past her to go hug his father, but Doug was there first. There was laughing, shouting, incoherent questions, and nothing else for some time. A short while later, Micah Greathouse was passing coffee cups into trembling hands. "Decaf for you," he told his sister, while Dr. Greathouse detailed her experience with Doug and Gus into her phone. Her description included many technical details using terminology in Greek, Latin, and Potawatomi, but her brother appeared to have no trouble following along and offered commentary, ending with, "So, how about a summary of the unexpected features?" She exchanged a look with him, cleared her throat, and said, "Well, the biggest one, of course, is how they were missing from the material plane. And there were little differences in their presence in the spirit world. They were warm. The image of their clothes was unaltered, vivid, didn't adapt to their change in size. And there were their phones. Yes, you don't usually get images of personal effects unless it's something you're using all the time, like glasses or a cane. Images? Kind of a pity no one tried making a call. I wonder if you'd had coverage." "Don't be..." She trailed off. "Are you saying those were their real phones? And clothes and boots? And above all, real bodies? You dropped them into the spirit world, and in a way, what more normal than their bodies going with them?" "Because that's not how it normally happens," Dr. Greathouse retorted. "But you've never sent folk on such a spirit trip before. Or rather, you've never sent such folk on a spirit trip." Greathouse considered a while. "That would mean my job was already done before we came back to the house. There was no need to get them back into their bodies because they never left their bodies." "That would fit the facts." "Why? Why wouldn't their souls leave?" "Because they're spirit people, powagons, fays." She gave an impatient hiss. "That's just saying that's how powagons are. It isn't an explanation." Doug, a little tired of being discussed in the third person, cleared his throat and said, "I can think of a bit more. The man who told us we had become fays told us that fays are immortal shapeshifters. Well, we've established he was right about the shapeshifting. He'd been sitting on a sofa. He stood and with a satisfied smile changed from man to Lung Mao as he rose, then stretched his arms and shrank back to man. Obviously, it'd take forever to establish the immortality, but granted, what if immortality means our bodies cannot be separated from our souls, not under any circumstances? Send us to the spirit world and all of us goes. Dr. Greathouse nodded and shrugged. It might be. Maybe the spirit people one meets in the spirit world are all there in the body. We assume they are pure spirits, discarnate, but how would you know? You two are the first ones I've met who want to stop and talk metaphysics. Micah Greathouse smiled wryly and said, "There's the reverse. Maybe you never meet anything but bodies. The inanimate hypothesis." Doug's father, who had been busy texting while the technical discussion went on, looked up and asked, "Inanimate?" "The old idea that fays have no souls, like in The Little Mermaid, the original." Mr. Weisskopf looked at his son's stricken face. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Oh, I agree," said Micah. "I find the Whilk hypothesis much more interesting and convincing. Nathaniel Whilk is a Kurdian," he explained. "I'm not one, but I still read a lot of their stuff. Whilk agrees that fays have no souls, but he says they don't have bodies either. They're a third thing. A fay," he nodded at Gus over his coffee, "is a body and a soul at the same time, or some third thing that is a fusion of them. They, you, are immortal spirits that are also bodies, and so immortal bodies. And as spirits are much more changeable than ordinary bodies, they can change shape readily. Your different shapes are different ways of thinking." He smiled at Mr. Weisskopf and clapped Gus on the shoulder. "This is your son's soul, a solid soul. So says Whilk." Father gazed at son, looking anxiously back. "I can believe that," he said. He looked back to the Greathouses. "You drink beer, whiskey, wine?" Brother and sister traded looks. "I think we can take a little firewater," Helen Greathouse said. "Because all those relatives I told you about? I texted them that it worked, and they're all coming here to celebrate." The end.